If you are a landlord or a tenant in Louisiana, it's crucial to understand the state's landlord-tenant laws and rights. It's important to stay up to date on all changes and updates to these laws to ensure that you're protected and informed. Whether you're a first-time renter or an experienced property owner, watch through this video to discover what you need to know about Louisiana's landlord-tenant laws. This video is supposed to provide general information about the Louisiana landlord-tenant laws. If you have any more questions, make sure to seek legal advice. Is Louisiana a landlord or a tenant-friendly state? As of today, Louisiana is considered a landlord-friendly state, since there are little to no regulations regarding security deposits, rent prices, evictions, and other clauses. How do you draft a rental agreement in Louisiana? According to Louisiana law, a rental agreement includes any sort of document in which both landlord and tenant state their rights and obligations for leasing a property. Generally, a written lease is the best way to go since it serves as a physical proof of the agreement, preventing future issues. While landlords are free to include as many requirements as they need, as long as they're compliant with Louisiana landlord-tenant laws, there are some general guidelines that everyone should follow for their document. Contact information of the parties involved in the lease, rent terms, cost, due date, grace period, late fees, utilities, description of rental unit, security deposit, and damage repairs. What are the landlord-tenant rights and responsibilities in Louisiana? Both the landlord and tenant have rights and obligations that should be stated in the lease document. These clauses should be compliant with the local state laws. Landlords have the right to collect rent payment, file eviction claims in the case of a breach in the agreement, and ensure that the unit is in a good condition by preventing prolonged damages to the unit. Landlord responsibilities. Generally speaking, landlords must keep their units in good condition. The landlord also must provide any repairs for damages that the new tenant asks for within the reasonable amount of time. If the landlord fails to do this within the notice, tenants may repair the damages by themselves and deduct the cost from their rent or security deposit. Some of these things that landlords are responsible for are the following: utilities, HVAC systems, proper plumbing, electricity, and running water. Tenant rights. Louisiana tenants have the right to live in a property that meets fair housing requirements, as well as the right to due process if the landlord decides to file an eviction claim. If any damages in the property exceed normal wear and tear, Louisiana tenants may send a written notice to the landlord for a fix. Tenants may exercise their repair and deduct right if the landlord fails to provide the required help. Tenant responsibilities. According to Louisiana landlord-tenant law, tenants are required to keep the rental unit clean and in good repair. Additionally, a tenant may not disturb neighbors or other tenants. Otherwise, the landlord may seek legal advice or services from an attorney. Louisiana landlord-tenant clauses. The Louisiana landlord-tenant law is fairly flexible when it comes to a lease agreement. However, there are many state laws that the landlord and tenant should be aware of before drafting a lease document. Keep in mind that these documents may be adjusted to fit the landlord's needs. Rent payment. According to Louisiana landlord-tenant law, the amount of rent is specified by the landlord at the time of drafting the lease document, and that rent amount must be paid on its due date. Rent can be set to be paid each week, month, or year, although a month-to-month rent is the most common choice. Louisiana landlord-tenant laws don't require landlords to give any kind of notice before they increase the rent, meaning that they can increase it as soon as they need it. Rent control. There are no rent control policies inside the Louisiana landlord-tenant law, meaning that the landlord may charge any amount they wish their new tenants. Late fees. Landlords may require their new tenants to pay late fees if they don't pay rent on time. However, this is not a requirement in Louisiana landlord-tenant laws. Additionally, there are no regulations for bounce check fees and grace periods. Grace periods. Louisiana law doesn't require landlords to include a grace period in their lease term for new tenants, meaning that they may charge a late fee the day after the rent due date. Lease renewals. The lease usually ends whenever it reaches its due date. However, landlords and tenants can choose to renew the lease. If no one drafts a notice of eviction or termination, the lease is considered renewed as a month-to-month lease in most cases. Security deposit clauses. There is no security deposit limit statute in Louisiana laws, which means that the landlord may charge as much for the deposit as they want. However, the amount of the security deposit should be reasonable within the lease terms. Landlords mostly use the security deposit to cover any unpaid rent, repairs, and other severe damages to the premises. If the tenant plans to leave the premises, landlords must return the deposit within 1 month after the tenant moves out. However, if the tenant abandons the premises without notice, landlords don't have to return the security deposit within that time frame. Landlords are legally allowed to withhold a security deposit to cover any default of the tenant. Last but not least, landlords can mix security deposits with other personal funds, although it's not recommended. Early termination and evictions in Louisiana. A tenant with a fixed-term lease isn't required to make any written notice before exercising their right to terminate the lease. However, landlords have a different notice statute depending on the type of lease they were giving for their premises. Weekly lease statute, 5-day notice. Monthly lease statute, 10-day notice. Yearly lease statute, 30-day notice. Landlords and tenants in Louisiana can choose to exercise their right for early termination in the following cases: early termination statute, military duty, lease statute breach, harassment or domestic violence. In standard eviction cases in Louisiana, the landlord must provide a 5-day notice to vacate for the tenant. This can happen if any of the following conditions are met: non-payment of rent, breach of lease terms, criminal activity. When it comes to a lease, the landlord cannot evict their tenant from the property in retaliation. This could make the tenant seek an attorney for help. In severe cases, these claims can go to court in Louisiana. For your own lease agreement template for Louisiana, click the link in the description for DoorLoop's forms page and download the PDF or Word template. Also, see your full guide on the eviction process and laws for Louisiana. Housing discrimination in Louisiana. The Fair Housing Act protects every tenant in Louisiana against any kind of discrimination from their landlords. These laws include protection under the following terms: national origin, sex and gender, disability, familial status, race, color, and religion. Additionally, a Louisiana court may provide protection for immigrants in the case that the landlords discriminate against them because of their nationality. Lock changing in Louisiana. A Louisiana landlord must provide written notice before changing the locks of the property. Doing this may be seen as retaliatory behavior and could be taken to court according to the state laws. Alternatively, Louisiana state laws don't specify any details regarding the tenant changing the locks for repairs or added security. However, it's recommended that they send a notice to their landlords before doing anything. Miscellaneous clauses. Landlord's rights to entry. There aren't any laws in Louisiana that specify any right to entry laws. This would mean that the landlords can enter their rental property at any time without making any written notice for their tenant. However, most landlords in Louisiana make an agreement with their tenant on circumstances in which they're allowed to enter the property, notification policies, etc. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video on Louisiana's landlord-tenant laws and rights. I hope that you found this information useful. Remember, understanding your rights and obligations as a landlord or a tenant is crucial for a successful rental experience. If you enjoyed watching this video and would like to see more content like this, please consider checking these out. Also, subscribe to be the first to know when we release new videos on this topic and many others. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to stay updated. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.